It's great to be with you again. What a wonderful luncheon we have for you this afternoon. This is going to be absolutely terrific. We have the opportunity of listening to Mayor Bill White, who has been so instrumental in drug prevention, not only throughout Houston, but throughout the county as well, and being an excellent example. An example as well through, with this, the fourth largest city in America, an excellent example of those things which should be done to help try and prevent drug and substance abuse. Here we are living in Houston, which is so close to, of course, a major border in which trafficking is so prevalent. And having witnessed that trafficking on many, many occasions, we know of Houston's tremendous need to be involved and as well to help eradicate this problem. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the lunch. Enjoy your meal. And we'll be listening now to remarks from Houston's Mayor, Bill White.
Thank you very much. You know, actually, there's no good reason why I'm here except you got to listen to somebody while you're digging into a good salad. Let me just start with that. I'm here to thank each of you for what you do and to encourage you to help us deal with the scourge of addiction in our society. We deal with it through education, we deal with it through prevention, we deal through it with law enforcement, we deal with treatment and all the other things that are involved in rebuilding lives and turning around lives. I'll ramble just a second to tell you how important you are and what I worry about. My worries are no different than some of yours. They're what I think brings many in this summit together. But perhaps maybe I could, by articulating what some people think, embolden individuals here to do what you do and to be a voice, an informed voice in our nation's fight against what addictive substances, narcotics, and drugs can do to the lives of our citizens. The first thing that I ask you to be a voice for is letting people know within your networks and as far beyond your networks as you can find it, but certainly within your networks, that the devastation caused by drug addiction is not sort of yesterday's news or some problem for which there is, quote, no solution, close quote, and is something that takes a toll in our society that is far surpasses the things that get in the headlines every day. You know, I'm sort of reminded of, I'll give you a couple of experiences that I've had in this job. These stories will not be unfamiliar to some of you all, this type of story, but I'm going to tell you a couple of anecdotes in dealing with those folks who had or should have had some responsibility on drug policy and draw some conclusions. My conclusions are meant not to educate, because I could learn more from y'all than vice versa, but to motivate you and give us some vocabulary for our advocacy. And I hope this doesn't get me in trouble, so we had somebody come in and was a very, very good person. And I'm trying to think about how much I could say about it. Let's say that this person was a federal official. A federal official with some new responsibilities within this region. And I asked the individual who had he was well recommended by peers within law enforcement. And I guess we had what you call a courtesy call for each of us getting to know each other, because our law enforcement works with this particular function from time to time. And I asked this individual what he saw to be our priorities, the priorities of his particular agency. This was several years ago. And the individual described counterterrorism, and then terrorism intervention, terrorism prevention by intelligence gathering, and counterterrorism. The last point was made to exclamation marks concerning what the priorities are, to which I asked, well, where does the flow of narcotics into our community stack up on that? Well, you know, you asked me what the highest priority. We're not saying that's unimportant, but, well, I know where this person's heart is, and I won't go on to reveal the rest of the conversation, but let me just say that it would be a shame if the events of the moment, whether they be a financial crisis, whether they be a hurricane disaster, whether they be criminals who run airplanes into buildings or anything else, distracted us from the devastation caused by narcotics, the supply, the demand, the treatment, the rehabilitation that causes so much devastation in the lives of not only those who are the direct victims of addiction, but those who are the victims of behavior that is motivated in large part by desire to get the money for drugs. And I can tell you where the people that I represent stand when it's a difference between dealing with a friend, loved one, or coworker who's been become addicted, or being a victim of a burglary or a robbery as a result of somebody else's addiction, and how that compares to a lot of the topics in the news. I can tell you that more lives are touched in this room and in the families throughout the community, be it through addiction of a friend, loved one, or coworker, or through the damage caused by those lives, compared to mortgage foreclosures, compared to terrorist incidents, compared to most anything I could list right here, right? You know that. I know that. Every employer knows that. But somehow I think there's a tendency to think that that's yesterday's news. I'll give you another story. And that somehow that talking about old issues are boring. I don't want to get in a situation that we've seen so many parents get in, where maybe they lost sight, or sometimes for reasons within their control or outside of their control. They had a teenager, and it was a battle every night. You know what I'm talking about? I don't mean it as a battle to just, keep them from being a juvenile delinquent. I mean just a battle to get them to do homework or something. The only people who know what I'm talking about are the people who've had teenagers. But all you people will know what I'm talking about, just like Andrew and I. So, but there are some parents who give up. You know what I'm saying? They give up. They give up because it takes endurance. Give up because it takes consistency. Give up because it takes commitment. Give up because it's harder to be disappointed when you don't care. And we can't give up. We can't give up, even if it's not on the front page or some politician isn't putting it in paragraph 1 of his speech. Another anecdote. So my sister-in-law wasn't too much interested in politics because I guess her view, she said up until the time I ran for office, was that most people were running for public office because they were into, their they wanted to be somebody, or they were, they didn't make a difference. And once they get in office, they forgot what they said they were going to do, and they thought they were something special and all this other type of stuff. You know what I'm talking about? So she says, but I'm going to start, okay. Those folks out there, they elected you, and I know who you are, and I want to get involved. And I said, really? I said, why? Is it just because? No, it's not, thank goodness. It wasn't just because I was elected. That's not where I was going. It was that because, there's something that I'm really disgusted about, and I want to try to change it. What's that? Well, you see, she was an alcohol and drug abuse counselor, and she worked in TDC at a couple of facilities in East Texas, and she had some clients who would ask her this question: how come that I can get treatment when I'm in prison, but I can't when I leave? And she says, and how do you answer that question? And I told her that because of society's values or where they put their money, your heart is where your treasure is, right? And that there's a lot of people who don't vote or can't vote. And so given the choice between funding one program and another, that I think that we probably give the short end of the stick to those programs. And the same is true why we underfund pre-K, why we underfund mental health, because those folks that tend to be disenfranchised tend not to be as represented as well when it comes to the allocation of funding. Is that right? I mean, it's a fact. So she said she wanted to get involved. Now, I think most people within this state, most people in this nation would agree that what we could do to prevent the kind of behavior that in a significant number of cases results in isolation, antisocial behavior, and in fact criminal behavior, is something that we ought to invest more in trying to prevent it if it works. And I think that's just a fact that most people think that. But I'm not sure that people are aware as starkly of the reality of how we've not lived up to what most people would think would be appropriate. Now, let me give you another anecdote. I've been in this job, and Chief Hurt, he does a good job and has good judgment, was very concerned that funding for a wide variety of drug-related programs was being terminated by the federal government, and the reason was that we needed the money to fight terrorism. I didn't hardly believe it, but we arranged, again, with a senior federal official, and that this is a very senior federal official who sort of explained, well, the current efforts in drug prevention, treatment, and trying to interrupt the supply weren't working. Therefore, we had to re-examine our priorities, meaning that, what did people say? I'm not endorsing this view, but once on a time I heard somebody talking about a strategy of, well, never mind, I won't use it, but it sounds like they were going to cut and run on trying to invest more in dealing with drugs. Maybe it wasn't the issue of the day. Maybe it wasn't in the headlines. I'm just asking people here I'm thanking you for what you do, and then saying finally that there's a lot of people who have views on topics. The people in this room probably have more information from a variety of different perspectives on the severity of the issue and what we can do on the supply side, the demand side, the treatment side, the rehab side, rebuilding lives through not only public, but nonprofit and faith-based institutions. I don't think there's a group that has the wisdom of the people I'm talking to anywhere in town. Somehow, the people that do have that wisdom, that do have that knowledge, that do understand, I want to support you, but please do everything that you can to find an effective voice, to come up with some common themes or programs or priorities that we should be doing. Present them to people like me and others who could publicize those. Develop multi-year plans for a community that take into the growth of the community. Have realistic objectives. The only objective can't be, oh, well, in 5 years there's going to be no narcotics. I mean, if you do that, then people are going to, yes, laugh. But, come up and try to define what our objectives are, how we measure progress toward those objectives, not just by the inputs, but by the outputs, how we evaluate the service providers that do a better job for the dollar and who do a worse job for the dollar. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy and there's going to be hard feelings, and sometimes it'll be arbitrary, but those things too we need to do. If you are able to do that, then I'm telling you that there's a lot of people out there that are willing to support efforts that are whole and effective, that deal with both sides of the problem. And in the meantime, don't lose heart. We greatly appreciate what you do. You're indispensable, and thank you. And I want to say a special thanks, by the way, is Dennis Stremski and I get to hang around with Ray Andrews quite a bit, and I want to say, Ray, you're the man. And I'll tell you some colorful stories about Ray, but I don't know any. So Ray is, what you see is what you get, which is somebody who is a good man, and we appreciate what you do. Thank you, Ray.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mia Grady. I'm with 39 News. Thank you so much all for being here. It is my distinguished pleasure to join you this afternoon. Forgive me, I was running a tad bit late. It's been a little while since I've been on a college campus, so I'm sure some of you can relate as well. Well, once again, I'm honored to join you this afternoon because this is an issue that is so far-reaching and affects so many of us, whether it's in our own families or in our communities. And our communities are our homes to our children and all of those who are important to us. So just as the mayor did, I want to salute you all for your efforts. I've met a lot of you individually over the years as I've worked with the DEA, and thank you so much for your continued effort. And we also want to thank our next speaker, our keynote speaker for the afternoon, because she is very much doing her part as well in continuing to make our community as a whole a better place. Ms. Sue Thaw serves as a policy advocate for the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. She's going to join us this afternoon to discuss establishing successful policy mobilization among community groups, all beneficial information I'm sure you can take with you this afternoon back to your establishment and work on building there a successful plan for your organization. Let's go ahead now and give a warm welcome to Ms. Sue Thaw.
Good afternoon. I have to say, you're probably the smartest city in America because you have one of the best mayors I have ever heard speak about our issue. Whoa. Well, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be here to speak to you today, and I want to begin with a story about a world-famous organ player who was actually invited to give a concert in Europe in a gigantic concert hall. And when he sat down and looked at the organ, he realized that, in fact, it was very, very old-fashioned, and that it worked by a guy pumping wind actually into the organ's pipes. So this very famous person sits down and he says, "Now I will play Beethoven." And he goes, and nothing happens. So he looks over at the guy who's piping the wind and he's like, okay, he thinks it's sort of all happening for him. So he goes, "Okay, now I will play Beethoven." And again, he pushes down the keys and nothing happens. So he gets up and he walks over to the guy who's supposed to be piping in the wind and he goes, "What's the story?" And the guy says to him, "You know, you'll get the wind when you sit down and say, 'Now we will play Beethoven.'" So as you can see, this story has a lot to do with conducting a regional drug summit because, as you've already figured out because of the people in this room, there is not one sector alone that can actually deal with the drug abuse problem. It takes every sector taking ownership of this issue as a whole and then be willing to work together as a team to support each other in implementing the 5-year strategy that you guys are going to come up with. Working to develop and implement the recommendations of a regional drug strategy, one, are not for prima donnas, so the organist would not work well here. And two, it's not a spectator sport. Getting involved in organizing, implementing, and selling to policymakers what it is you're going to come up with is not only a team sport, it's a contact sport. And it's one where all of the key players are going to have to make a commitment to be involved for multiple seasons. In this case, it looks like 5 years. All of you are already working together as a team: education, prevention, treatment, recovery, law enforcement, criminal justice. You have some unbelievably amazing elected officials here like Mayor White, business and other community sectors. The key really is to institutionalize what you're doing in this drug summit so that it's not a one-shot pickup game, but it's actually a true long-term commitment. I have to say, I love the urgency of now as the theme for the Regional Drug Summit, because the drug issue is one that urgently needs to be dealt with and dealt with comprehensively now. But, and the mayor spoke to this a little bit, with a new administration and a new Congress coming in, it's actually really urgent that we're all going to be prepared to make the case to them that comprehensively dealing with and funding all aspects of the drug issue must be a major priority for them. The mayor was right. This is off the front pages of the newspaper, and politicians tend to pay attention to things that are right in their face. So I can tell you, as an old budget examiner in the Federal Office of Management and Budget, that I know for a fact whoever is going to be coming into power is going to be looking for places that they can cut the federal budget. And unfortunately, because we're facing massive budget deficits, homeland security issues, 2 wars, a massive bailout, we're in trouble as far as funding at the federal level. And the easiest and first place the policymakers look to make cuts is in federal domestic discretionary funding. And unfortunately, all of the federal programs that fund drug education, prevention, treatment, recovery, law enforcement, criminal justice, they all fall into that domestic discretionary category. And it's a major problem. I have to say, too, I don't know about Texas, but where I come from back east, I live in D.C. D.C. has a major problem. Virginia does. One of the first places they're looking to cut, get this, is law enforcement. That makes no sense. And I'm not sure if it's because they want a public outcry and people say don't cut law enforcement because it's going to reduce public safety, or if they're serious about it. But I can tell you, We're in trouble at all levels of government as far as the budget crisis. And I can tell you, too, as an old budget examiner, I'm one of those pointy green eye shade people who used to go through and have to cut money out of the federal budget, that the budget examiners at every level of government are going to be scouring over programs for potential cuts. In fact, before the new administration even takes over on January 20th, transition team is going to come in, and they're going to take stock of every program in every department, and they're going to be looking for agencies and programs that they can actually get away with cutting. And what do I mean by that? They're going to be looking for programs that are supposedly not effective, okay, but they're also going to be looking for programs that they don't think have major constituencies willing to speak up and fight for them. The mayor spoke about that, too. They look for things where their people are disenfranchised, where they are not going to feel a lot of political heat for cutting things. So we have to make sure, and this is exactly where advocacy as a contact sport comes in, that if anybody looks to cut any of the programs that fund what we do, there's going to be a massive outcry. That is critical, because if we don't play the advocacy policy game like a contact sport, if we don't get on the radar screen of the new administration and the new Congress, we're going to be in trouble. So it comes down to, it's all about contacts. It's making sure that elected officials at every level, and you're so lucky to have a mayor who obviously gets it, understand that, in fact, this is a program that, if it's not dealt with, costs so much more money than the money that they're investing in trying to deal with it, that we can't get out of the mess that we're in unless we deal with the drug issue. So I know that you guys are here to build and mobilize a comprehensive community-wide social movement to develop a 5-year strategic action plan to deal with substance misuse in Houston-Harris County. And I know that you're going to have the data when you're finished with this meeting that lays out the extent of the problem, the costs and consequences of drug use in Houston and Harris County. You can see I read the briefing materials. And the policies and strategies and programs and services that you're going to need to deal with your local drug issue. And I know that you intend to present this plan to federal, state, city, and county officials. But I got to tell you, it's not enough to do all this work just to present it to key decision makers and elected officials. You really need, this goes back to the theme of this whole talk, to make advocacy an integral part of your strategic action plan over the 5-year period. It has to be a contact sport from start to finish. You have to build right into this plan how and when you're going to educate elected officials at all levels about what's really going on regarding substance abuse and misuse in Houston and Harris County and how it needs to be dealt with. You're also going to have to use this process to raise the level of awareness about all of the resources you will need to implement this plan. So I hope, as a major part of your work, you're going to actually map out in detail all of the federal, state, city, and county programs that fund the drug-related efforts that all of you sitting in this room now rely on to do your work. And every one of you needs to be on board to fight against proposed cuts to any of the programs that fund any of the work that all of you do at all levels of government. This is, again, where it becomes a contact sport. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. The people who speak up tend to keep their money. The people that don't or don't think they have to tend to get cut. So I can tell you, unfortunately, that the Safe and Drug-Free Schools and Communities program that Peter Messiah so brilliantly runs, and I know him because he does a fabulous job coming to Washington to help keep this program going, that's going to be on a list of ineffective programs because, unfortunately, it's been slated for zeroing out or massive cuts, gosh, for the past 7 years. And we fight every year to get that money put back in. But he needs every one of you to stand up with him to help save that program. Just like he's going to stand up if they try to cut law enforcement or if they try to cut treatment. And believe me, I know that many of the programs that fund us across the supply-demand continuum, within the supply side, within the demand side, all of them are going to be on the cutting block. And we need to stand together, all of us, to make sure that we are the vocal, visible people on the radar screen of elected officials. So, if we're going to have the funds and the programs to actually implement your comprehensive 5-year strategic action plan, advocacy really does need to be built in from the beginning as a strategic key component of that plan. So, you're going to need to ensure that as a big group, everybody that's here working on this across sectors, that you're vocal and visible enough so that the entire drug issue, from education through law enforcement, treatment, recovery, intervention, everybody, all of us are together on the radar screen of elected officials so that they know the drug issue actually has a visible and vocal constituency. And if they propose cutting any of the funding that you collectively rely on, they know they're going to get contacted about it en masse by their constituents, and that's what it takes. Advocacy is a contact sport. If I leave you with nothing else, because I know it's really hard when people are eating dessert to listen to somebody blab on and on, but if I leave you with nothing else, it's that advocacy is a contact sport. And the more contact elected officials at every level of government have from their constituents on an issue, the more likely you are to get what you want, and the more likely you are to see our field being a priority for them. It's not good enough to sit on the sidelines and think somebody else is going to do the advocacy for you. The great progress that we've made in getting recommended cuts in past presidents' budget restored for programs like Safe and Drug-Free Schools. Beverly was the head of the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. That program had been slated for up to $50 million reductions every single year. And every year we fight like hell and we get that money put back in the budget. How many of you rely on Burn Jag? That got really whacked, okay, and we're all fighting to get that put back. HIDA was proposed to be moved to justice and to be cut. We've fought and we've won on a lot of these issues, but we are in the toughest funding environment we've been in a long time, and whatever fight we have put up to date to make sure these programs still exist, we're going to have to fight harder in the future. So, basically, these programs still exist because folks like you actually were willing to make the contact with the White House and members of your congressional delegations about the value of these programs. You told them, this will not stand. These programs need to be put back in. The president's budget is a request to Congress. It's the Congress that appropriates the money. So your congressional delegation needs to understand how valuable every one of these programs are to you. Because if they don't hear from you, their constituents, the people that vote for them, that this is something that you really need, believe me, we're going to see major cuts to all of the programs you are going to be relying on to implement this 5-year strategic action plan. So, as far as contacts go, and this is just sort of common sense, but quantity and quality both count. So, by quantity, I obviously mean there's strength in numbers. The more an elected official at any level of government hears from their constituents, the people that vote for them and put them in office, about an issue, the more likely they are to watch out for it, to care about it, and to become a champion for it. Numbers count, whether it's calls, letters, faxes, meetings, signatures on a petition. The more contacted elected officials have about an issue, the more likely they are to pay attention to that issue. And the more they're going to care about delivering what their constituents are asking for. Now, quality of the contact also counts. And what do I mean by quality? The mayor spoke about this too. You have to support what you're asking for with facts and figures to make your case. And sharing data about the outcomes of your programs. Sharing why they work, how they work. That in fact, drug use is down, recidivism is down, whatever the indicators they are that you are using to measure your success. You need to make sure your elected officials have that information, because otherwise they're not going to know that your programs work or how they stack up against other investments. We have to be better about our stuff does work. We know it. We have the data. We just have to be better about sharing it with the people that make the funding decisions. So, Your elected officials need to actually have a stake in protecting the programs that fund you. And they need the data and information that shows them that these programs are actually effective. That's what I mean by quality of the contacts. Not just we need this money, but we need this money because it's critical and it works and we know that it does. Okay. The quality of the contact also means making sure that you're asking for things at the right time in the process. If you wait for Congress to act before you make your case, it's too late. And I want to use an example here. How many of you have anything to do with drug courts? Okay. The drug court program is a really good example last year of a program that really got messed up because the quality of the contacts didn't come at the right time. Both the House and the Senate last year had increased funding for that program from a gigantic cut the year before. It was only $10 million. They had $40 million in the House and $40 million in the Senate. And they thought, oh, this is great. We're going to end up with $40 million in conference. So you know what? They didn't mobilize anybody before the conference committee met. So the people on the conference committee didn't hear from anybody about drug courts. And it was a really tight year last year. Anyone that gets money in the criminal justice sector knows that. Everything got whacked. Well, unfortunately, the drug court people who thought that they had $40 million locked up ended up with only $15 million last year. Why? Because they didn't speak up at the end of the process. You got to make this a contact sport, and you got to play your best till the very end of the game. You can't sort of think you've won, take your first team off the field. It doesn't work that way. So the cut, by the time people spoke up, that had passed. The cut was law. And in fact, they're trying now to get back up to the 40 million. But quality of the contacts means being in touch with people at the federal level, like myself, like the IACP people, if you're a police person, like NASADAD, the National Association of State and Alcohol Drug Abuse Directors, like the Legal Action Center, who represents a lot of the state associations. Whoever it is in Washington that tracks the stuff you're interested in, make sure that you have relationships with them built into the strategic action plan. Because all of us track this stuff, and we do action alerts, and we tell people at the local level when they need to weigh in and what they need to weigh in on, and you need to be tied into those groups. The other thing I can't stress enough is you have to build and sustain relationships with all of your elected officials at every level of government. It's unbelievable that you have Mayor White, but he's not enough. You need your county people, your state people, and your federal delegation. You have to have relationships cultivated over time with all of them. And as a group, you really need to be proactive and a resource to all of your elected officials. Familiarity in this sense does not breed contempt, it breeds access. So collectively, you guys are the experts on drug prevention, treatment, law enforcement, and criminal justice in Houston and Harris County. Nobody knows more about this than you do. So you guys really need to work together to share your experience, your knowledge, and your expertise about what's really going on in Houston and Harris County and what you need your congressional delegation to help you with. You need to share all of your outcomes and your successes across community sectors. You need to invite them to your events. It's great the mayor was here. It's great that you have your congresswoman coming tomorrow. You're doing it right, but you need to keep it up throughout the entire process. We need more champions for our field. We just don't have enough people who have the drug issue as their major passion in life on Capitol Hill. So I want to take a minute to share with you how another person from Texas, a congresswoman who is just wonderful from the Dallas area, became a champion for us, okay? How many of you know about the cheese epidemic that happened in Dallas between 2005 and 2007? Okay. 22 youth died by overdosing on cheese, which is a combination of black tar, heroin, and cold medicine. So the Greater Dallas Council on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, which is also a comprehensive community-wide coalition with all the sectors involved, thank goodness they were already organized, so they got right on dealing with the cheese epidemic by using all of their sectors and all of the representatives of the sectors to implement targeted strategies. So I'm going to start with the schools because this is sort of the beginning of where the story goes. Okay, they use the schools to get information in English and Spanish out in every kid's backpack. They use the schools to hold community meetings. They used media outlets to raise awareness. It's fabulous that you have your media people here. Unbelievable, because we need you to get the word out. It's critical. So thank you. They used their media people to get the word out about the dangers of cheese and the fact that it was becoming an epidemic. They coordinated with their treatment providers. They stepped up enforcement issues. They coordinated with social workers who specialize in street out youth. And what they did that was the most important thing as far as I was concerned was they got Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson immediately and intimately involved in this crisis and how they were dealing with it. Now, this was at the height of our working to restore the money for the Safe and Drug-Free Schools and Communities program, the one that funds Peter Messiah's efforts. That had been slated for a, get this, $350 million reduction in the president's budget. Well, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson was so involved in addressing the cheese issue at home in Dallas, and she so understood firsthand how important this money was to getting the word out and to saving lives. They went from 22 deaths to 0 last year, that she became a major champion for this program in the United States Congress. Okay, we have a couple of champions for this program, but not one of them, and I'm not going to mention names either, was willing to go up against Chairman Obey, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, to ask that there be a floor amendment offered to put this money back on the House floor, because the Appropriations Committee had already decided that they were not going to add the money back. You know how much guts it took? Everybody was afraid that they would get in trouble with him and he would end up not funding their pet projects, their earmarks. So nobody was willing to stand up for this. But Eddie Bernice Johnson, no, she was. She basically took it on herself to offer a floor amendment, and she stood up on the House floor, and her remarks basically were saying, I don't know what the rest of you aren't getting, but this program works. I know it works. I've been involved with it. This program ends up raising awareness and ends up saving lives. And you know what? Her amendment unanimously passed on the House floor. And, yep, and Congressman Obey, who everybody was so afraid of, voted for it. So this is what we need, and we get this by intimately involving our elected officials at every level of government in what we're doing. Because what you're doing saves lives. It matters. It really makes a difference. So as you develop your strategic action plan, this is the right time to start developing champions. You really need to cultivate your elected officials so that they are involved from the very beginning in understanding what the issues are that you're dealing with and what it is you think it's going to take to solve them across sectors and what resources you need for them to make sure exist so that you can actually be successful in what you're doing. So to make and sustain change and to get on the policy radar screen of elected officials takes a couple of things. First, it takes grassroots advocates like every one of you, people who have passion and commitment and the determination to do whatever it takes to make sure that the programs that fund what you think are important to reduce drug use, misuse, and addiction actually exist. Second, you really do need to educate your officials. I'm here to tell you that elected officials, except your mayor, who seems to really get what we're talking about, for the most part, are generalists. Are they experts in the drug issue? No. Who are the experts in the drug issue? You are. That's exactly right. So I'm actually here today to challenge every one of you to become committed advocates for our field. These are the people that don't just send in their own letters or their own faxes to elected officials. They spend their time and energy making sure that hundreds, if not thousands, of other people do too, because it's a contact sport, remember? It's the number of contacts matter. It's fabulous if you can send in a letter, but if you can get 10 other people to send in a letter and they can get their Christmas card list to all send in a letter, all of a sudden, we really have a movement. Okay. So the key ingredient in getting picked up on the radar screen of elected officials is to make sure that they understand who you are and why what you're doing is important and that it works. So, how many of you homeschool your children, if I might ask? Anybody in this room homeschool their children? Now, this is another really interesting story. Very few people homeschool their children, and yet the people who do are really involved in advocacy. They were able to close down the Capitol Hill switchboard. You know how many calls it takes to close down the switchboard so nobody else can get their calls through? The homeschooling people were able to do it. So as small as their numbers are, they're organized, they're vocal, they're visible, and they get attention paid to their issue. And I got to tell you, only those fields at this point that demand attention through sustained visible, vocal, grassroots advocacy get attention. Unless we market what we do and make sure elected officials understand that it's effective, that it works, and that it's critical, we're actually wasting our time putting this strategy together because we're never going to end up getting it funded. So you're all here today because you truly do believe in the power of education, prevention, treatment, law enforcement, recovery, and criminal justice to change behavior and community norms. You guys wouldn't be here if you didn't think it worked. But how many of you believe that all of your elected officials understand the importance of the programs that you work on? Nobody. Okay. Well, the only way that they're going to get the information to become champions for us is if we give it to them ourselves. The only way they're going to understand that our programs work, that they have outcomes, that they make a difference, are if we collectively share those outcomes with them, which needs to be built into your plan as a key ingredient. Over the long haul, how are you going to keep your elected officials at all levels engaged? So the only way that this issue is going to be on the radar screen and stay on the radar screen is if you guys put it on their radar screens. Your elected officials need to know who you are as a group, who's in the group, all of the sectors, what specific drug issues you're dealing with now. In Houston, it came up that crack cocaine is still an issue here. Well, they need to know that because you have the data to show that. I don't know, do you think your elected officials will know that? That's major news, and that should be on the news. Okay, they need to know how you're presently dealing with these issues across all of your sectors, what you've already accomplished, and what you want to accomplish in the future and why. What is it that you think this 5-year plan is going to be addressing? Then it's critical they understand what the resources and programs that are going to help you implement this plan in the future are. Because if they don't hear from you about what you need, how are they going to know to watch out for it if somebody's planning or proposing to cut it in the budget? They need to know what it is that funds you. And if they don't know about the great work you're doing because you haven't told them, why would they bother to stick their necks out like Eddie Bernice Johnson did to save it? They have to know about it first. So we need to make sure that we are the ones visible on the radar screen. I have to say, every one of you in this room is a resource to elected officials. You guys have really valuable information about what's really going on in Houston and Harris County with drug use. Who's using? What's the age of initiation? Where are they using? What kind of drugs? How many people need treatment? Does drug courts work? Does it cut recidivism? You actually are the experts on all of this. You have school survey results. Okay, you have other data collection efforts. You need to share this data with your elected officials so that they actually understand the extent of the problem and maybe the extent of the success that you've been able to achieve. But frankly, you have to look at yourselves not as a pain in the neck who's calling to bug them about stuff, but as real resources that are going to raise their awareness about the harms, the costs, the consequences, and also the major achievements that you've achieved in dealing with the drug issue. Now, as I said, elected officials are generalists, which means they deal with a slew of different issues every day. So they are not the experts on education, prevention, treatment, law enforcement, criminal justice. They're not. You guys are. So, again, advocacy is really a contact sport. And if your voices are not the ones that are heard, by your elected officials and their key staffers, because those are the people that actually help to make a lot of these decisions, and they're less generalists than their bosses are. They're actually people who do have some expertise in these areas. But if it's not our voices that are heard, it's going to be the homeschooling people. It's going to be the people with the louder voices who are better paid in organized interests, people with lobbyists, which most of us don't have. We don't have PACs in our field. Those are the people that are going to end up being heard if we don't speak up. Now, you guys definitely have passion for this, or you wouldn't be spending 2 days doing this. Believe me, I know. So, I want to tell you, you need to turn that passion into power, and I'm going to end by explaining how I think you might want to do that. Numbers of power. There are a couple of hundred people here today, and every one of you is obviously part of a grassroots mobilization effort in Houston and Harris County. That's power. Coalitions are power. You have all of the sectors and groups in Houston and Harris County that deal with drugs coming together to put together a strategic 5-year action plan. That's power. Knowledge is power. Knowledge of the actual extent of the drug issue in Houston and Harris County. Knowledge of the legislative and budget processes so that you don't end up like drug courts thinking that you're doing great and finding out that they've cut you by 3/4. Knowledge of how to be an effective advocate and then actually doing the work of an effective advocate. That's power. Relationships are power. You need to make sure from the very beginning that all of your elected officials know what you want to accomplish and what you need from them to help you accomplish it. And every one of you has power because you're constituents and you vote. Believe me, that's the power that elected officials take very seriously, because they can't keep their jobs if people don't continue to vote for them. So I have to say, to be successful, to be on the policy radar screen, what we need to do is build a bigger coalition of what I'm going to call the willing. Those of you willing to make phone calls, those of you willing to fax letters to your congressional delegations and your elected officials, those of you willing to set up and attend meetings along the entire 5 years of this strategic plan, those of you willing to build and sustain relationships with your elected officials and their staffs, those of you willing to show up and ask questions at candidate forums at every level of government. Were the presidential candidates here at all in Houston? Did anybody ask a question of them about the drug issue while they were here? Unfortunately, I haven't heard one question asked in any of the debates about the drug issue. That's really a problem for us, because it means that these guys don't necessarily think anybody cares about this issue. We need to do better sort of getting our questions placed in front of elected officials. Okay, and the key now is every one of you needs to make a commitment to make advocacy an integral part of your professional lives, because working together as a coalition of the willing, we have power. Working together as a coalition of the willing, we can change the local, state, and national agendas. We can get the drug issue higher on the policy radar screen. Working together as part of the coalition of the willing, we can ensure that education, prevention, treatment, recovery, law enforcement, and criminal justice get the funding and attention they deserve, rather than ending up on lists of things to be cut or zeroed out. And we need every one of you to get out of the bleachers and onto the field to play the contact sport of advocacy for our field, because all of us here working together on the Houston-Harris County Strategic Action Plan are both the organists and the wind that are going to allow our field to play Beethoven in terms of comprehensive community-wide policies, planning, funding, and dealing with the drug issue at all levels of government, so that you can have a safe, and drug-free community. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Sue Thaw for coming from Washington, D.C. There's a story that has just broken in the past month where people in Egypt have been traveling, and from all really around the world, because there's a picture of Jesus and they see blood that coming out of the eyes of this painting. And people all over the world are making pilgrimages because they want to go touch that picture of Jesus because they believe that something powerful is going to happen. Now, she's no Jesus, and she doesn't cry blood, but anytime that I can hear Sue Thaw speak, I travel wherever I could go because I want to remember what it takes to keep our programs alive. And I'm about to say amen, but I mean, she really does a great job. And for the past 6 years that I have been blessed to hear her speak, I felt so selfish. And so when we were able to open up and say who we would like to have come, the first name I threw out was Sue Thaw, and the second name I threw out was Beverly Watts Davis. And I'm going to have to get her straight because she gave someone else credit. But Beverly, I was there in February and I asked you to come. But Beverly, would you please come forward? I know you wanted to say a few things too.
Well, thank you for allowing me just this point of personal privilege, but I do really need to share with you all something incredibly important. I know Sue has just spoke to us and she has engaged all of us and implored all of us to be able to get involved truly in this contact sport. But I want you all to know in Washington, we have a less than 5-foot person who is truly our little bit of dynamite. And I'm saying this to you all because I want you all to know when it comes to the drug budget anywhere, whether it comes to SAMHSA's programs, whether it comes to prevention, treatment, when it comes to the National Guard, when it comes to the Department of Defense, the demand reduction budget, when it comes to the FBI and the DEA budget, when it comes to NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, or NIAAA, their budget, when it comes to the Ross and the drug-free community housing programs in HUD, their budget, when it comes to the methamphetamine budgets that are in the Department of Interior, when it comes to the Department of Justice and the weed and seed programs, we have one person who coordinates, I just want to tell you, who leads us and coordinates our efforts. The reason we got $10 million extra in the Drug-Free Communities budget is because of Sue Thaw. The reason we had the Community Coalition Institute is because of Sue Thaw. The reason that we had more money come to SAMHSA was because of Sue Thaw. The reason we have a recovery and access to recovery budget is because of Sue Thaw. And I just want you to know she is the reason why we have the federal drug budget.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And Ms. Thaw, you talked about the Coalition of the Willing. Well, sign me up. And I think we have a bunch of volunteers here in this room and folks who are going to move forward and do the same. One thing I'm definitely going to do, a promise to you, Ms. Thaw, is to look into that problem here in Houston about cocaine, because that was something I was not aware of before walking into this room. So here is an advocate for you and your cause, putting it to work. Well, I'm sure you ladies and gentlemen have enjoyed your lunch here. We have a wonderful afternoon and action-packed agenda planned for you that we're going to continue with. I want to thank all of you. They said at some point, recognize all of our distinguished guests and our VIPs. Well, in my eyes, you're all distinguished guests and VIPs, so please give yourself a round of applause. At this time, if you want to finish up your dessert or if you want to communicate with some of your friends that you haven't seen in a while, please feel free to go ahead and do so. We're going to resume our afternoon at 1:30, so just come back into the room. We'll get started then, and we have Mr. Maples who's slated to speak for us this afternoon, okay? Thank you so much, and we'll see you real soon.
Before we start this session, I want to take just a couple of minutes to say something personal. This is particularly significant to me. Yesterday it was announced, I think it's in the program, that I was the Harry and Hazel Siobhan Professor of Religion and Public Policy in the Sociology Department, and am now, the last several years, have been the Harry Siobhan Fellow in Religion and Public Policy and also in Drug Policy. And I have just come from the funeral. Mr. excuse me, of Mr. Harry Chavon, who died on Friday at 96. He was a wonderful man and a great friend to this university and to Baker Institute. His grandchildren talked about what a young, vibrant man he was all of his life. I did the math on it, and it was in 1991. He called my wife and me and said, "Would you all like to go to a movie on a double date?" And so we said yes, so we went out to eat, and we went to see the movie Manon of the Spring, which was set in Provence. Beautiful movie, and after it was over, he said, "Would you all like to go bicycling across France? I don't think I could walk it anymore, but I think I could bike it." He was 78. But early on, he was a very generous man. He gave, it takes a lot of money to endow a chair, either at Rice or at the Baker Institute. And shortly after I was fully occupying the chair, I wanted to have a conference on religion and public policy in the early 2000s, and Ambassador Jurigian and I had lunch with Harry, and I just didn't want to ask him for any more money. But Ambassador Jurigian, as a founding director, had no qualms, and he said, "We're having this program, Harry, and we just thought you'd want to know about it." And Harry said, "So you want me to give some money, right?" He said, if you, we just wanted you to know about it, but if you'd like to give some money, that would be great." He said, "Well, how much do you need?" And the ambassador said, "We think it's probably going to take about $100,000, and whatever you could contribute to that would be useful." Well, he said, "I'll see what I can do." About 4 hours later, he called and says, "I sold some stock, checks on the way, $100,000. A year later, I was planning a drug policy conference here in 2002, and I didn't think he would have any interest in that, so I sent it, but I sent it just as courtesy. "This is what we're going to be doing. I am explicitly not asking you for any money on this." The next time I saw him, he said, "Send a check for your program." Well, it didn't cover the whole program, but it was, to use a technical accounting term, a significant chunk, and it helped a lot. I would, by the way, if the papers from that conference are available on the Baker Institute website, bakerinstitute.org. Click on drug policy, and I think you will find some very enlightening and useful papers. They take a view that's not always expressed in such conferences, but I was unable to hear Sheila Jackson Lee, but I understand that she did not take simply a straight line orthodox position on a number of things, and I think I would invite you to hear those programs. Now, during our program today, we're going to have our speakers going to speak in turn, and then we will have question period afterward. There are question cards available to you. If you would hold up your hand, if you have a question as they come along, hold up your hand. They'll be given to me, and then we'll try to simplify that as much as possible. If you looked at the title of this session in your program, Sentencing Disparities Across, you may have thought it was intended to be an enigmatic phrase that was supposed to prick your curiosity. Instead, it's simply a confusing mistake that is entirely my fault. In our planning sessions, when we were talking about what we wanted to include in this session on law enforcement, we thought it'd be good to talk about such aspects as the criminal justice system as sentencing disparities across demographic groups, possible differences in arrest and other enforcement measures by ethnicity and social class, pertinent issues in adjudication such as probation and alternate sentencing, and promising new approaches such as drug courts. I was so delighted when the three people on our program today accepted our invitation that when I was given a draft copy of the program, I failed to note that I was supposed to provide an appropriate title for this session. So what came out was the sentence fragment that's referred to as just one of the things that I thought we might talk about. A better title would be Pertinent Issues in the Enforcement of Drug Laws and the Adjudication of Drug Offenders, or better still, three outstanding criminal justice experts say whatever they want to about the problems and possibilities of drug policy. The first of our experts today is Chief Harold Hurt. Obviously, the police play a key role in the enforcement of drug policy. One of the defining characteristics of police work is discretion. Where to deploy forces, whether to notice or to ignore, whether to arrest or issue a warning, what tools to use to enforce or to ensure public safety and preserve the rights of citizens, including those known or suspected to be breaking the law. and so on. This is not news, and nor could it be any other way. But it does pose consistent challenges for police departments and individual officers, and it underscores the difficulty of the essential service they perform for our society. Now, to speak about some of these matters today, particularly as they relate to drug use and drug policy, we're fortunate to have Harold L. Hurt, who has been Chief of Police for the Houston Department since 2004. Details of his professional biography are in your program, so I will not go over those too much, except to note that in 2002 and again in 2004, Chief Hurt was selected by his peers as president of the Major Cities Chiefs Association, an organization of the 63 largest police departments in the United States and Canada. He is regarded, therefore, as one of the best of the finest. Please welcome Chief Harold Hurt.
Thanks for that welcome, and it's a pleasure for me to be here to take part in a discussion about a very important subject. You know, as Chief of Police in the city of Houston, I'm aware of the many complex issues surrounding drug use and crime, everything from mischief to drug-related homicides. These cases, and many more, come through the doors of the Houston Police Department on a daily basis. Today, I'm going to touch on several topics as I was requested. I'm going to talk about the general problem that the nation as a whole is facing, talk a little about arrest statistics for HPD, talk about the flow of drugs in and out of Houston, as well as prescription drugs, talk a little bit about House Bill 2391 and how that affects the Houston Police Department, and talk finally about solutions. And I think that's the reason that we're all here, some of the programs that I think that we should expand and become more involved in, and of course spend more money on. An overview of drug issues in this country. As you all know, the U.S. leads the world in the number of people incarcerated. And one thing that I've learned in 40 years of law enforcement is that we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. You look at the cost for jailing individuals. You look at the overcrowded conditions that we hold individuals while they're in jail and in prison, and the cycle of supply and demand continuing. And I was riding out here and I was talking to some of the staff was in the vehicle, and I asked them, I said, you guys remember when we declared a war on drugs? And I asked them, did we win? And we went to start talking about Korea and Vietnam and some other issues, because it's still a very urgent issue that we need to expend our energy and funds on today. One of the things that I was asked to cover was this question: does law enforcement unequally enforce the law? Now, I can't speak for everybody in law enforcement, but I can speak for HPD. As far as what our policy and our philosophy is, that HPD officers do not target suspects based upon their race. We target individuals based upon their criminal activity. We do also, was one of the first agencies in this country that was collecting racial profiling data when that was became mandatory by the federal government, and we still do that and report it to the state. Now, let me give you an overview of the city of Houston as far as the population, then I will further, and you may raise your eyebrows when I touch some of the statistics about who we've been arresting for the last year and 9 months. Of course, in the city of Houston, these are numbers from the Houston Planning and Development Department. We have about 27% white, 24% black, 5.2% Asian, 0.09 other, and 41% Hispanic. 2.2 million people within the city of Houston. And there's some issues on the Hispanic numbers, because I understand, and the city also in this collection, the Hispanics are either in a category by themselves or also in a category with white. So those numbers get a little fuzzy sometimes. Now, how many and who do we arrest for possession of narcotics or use of narcotics or sale of narcotics? In 2007, and I'll just go over the primary groups that's in the city of Houston. It says 31.4% white, 61.6% black or African American, 6.7% Hispanic. And then you have that overlapping of white and Hispanic again. And so far in 2008, those percentages are about the same, only 1 or 2 points difference based upon the entire year for last year when you look at the percentages. And you may ask, well, Chief, if you have a city of, say, 24% African American or black and 61% arrested for drug crimes, is there a problem? On the face of the number, you may say, well, how can it not be? But then if you start looking at some of the socioeconomic issues and factors as far as income level, educational level, employment, skill level, also if you look at, for others in the community, immigration status and those issues, and awareness of services to help people be successful in life, that may not be so out of line based upon conditions that individuals find themselves. And I talk about this a lot when we put in our anti-crime efforts together in the city of Houston. We look at what we call our so-called hot spots, and we look at who lived there, who worked there, what's happening in those areas, and we use resources to target those areas. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is get a discussion started about the causal factors that drive crime. Education, housing, skills, ability to obtain skills and employment, underemployment. And if we're successful in dealing with those issues, and then the challenges that the 5,000 men and women in Houston Police Department have every day of trying to bring order and maintain safety in the city, will be somewhat diminished. So when we're talking about the drug issue, and we're talking about the crime issue, we need to look at all of those variables that contribute to that particular subject. So keep that in mind while you're preparing those questions for me. Let's talk about the cocaine issue in the city of Houston. Cocaine continues to be a major narcotics problem in this city, in this Houston area. Cocaine, like many other drugs, are brought into the city of Houston via Mexico. Once here, they're either sold, used on the street, stored, broken down for distribution to the East Coast and other parts of the country. As of October 2008, the Houston Police Department has seized over 799 kilos of powder cocaine. And since we're at Rice, I don't have to tell you a kilo is 2.2 pounds. So just to let you know, to give you an idea. And we've also obtained or seized 20 kilograms of crack cocaine. Street distribution of crack cocaine generates the majority of our citizens' complaints in most of those hot spot areas. And you wonder, well, How do you know who to arrest? Because in a lot of cases, when we get a call about drug dealers on a corner, it comes from someone that lives in the community. The drug dealing and the use is oftentimes happen between neighbors, and not only do they call us and give us the names of the individuals. We're great investigators and where they live. So, and you look at the numbers, and people get called from people that known these individuals all their lives. And the reason they call us, because there's no one else to call. Simple as that. There's no one else to call. Let's talk about the price. And when I talk about the price, I also want you to keep in mind burglary, theft, shoplifting, burglary of motor vehicle. How do we think these people are affording to support their habits? Okay? Price of cocaine. An ounce of cocaine has a street value of $450 to $550. A kilogram runs between 16,000 and 24,000. And the purity of the cocaine that we're finding on the streets is between 60 and 90% pure. Crack cocaine average about $20 a rock. That's a little bit you buy in your hand, guys, keep it in the mouth and sell it to individuals that drive up. And it's about $130 to $140 per quarter ounce and $500 to $600 per ounce. So that'll give you an idea of the cost. Now that's just the cost on the front end of the use of cocaine. Now look at the cost when it comes to crime. Look at the cost when it comes to violent crime. Look at the cost for people missing work, being treated in the hospital, losing their job, not able to support their families. And this goes both ways, the victim and the suspect, at the total cost of this. So this is important stuff that we're talking about today. Marijuana. Black cocaine also comes mostly into the U.S. or into Houston from Mexico. This year, HPD has seized over 39,000 pounds of marijuana. Marijuana price ranges from $60 to $100 per ounce and $300 to $600 per pound. Methamphetamine continues to be a problem in the city. The number of local meth labs have seen a little increase. But Mexican-produced ice, as it often is called, sells locally from $1,500 to $1,800 per ounce. The other street names, just in case you want to know what people are talking about when you're walking down the street, the other street names of meth is crank, glass, and crystal. Just part for your education. The next drug is Mexican black tar. That's heroin. It's increasing in the city as well as the Houston area. Again, the source from Mexico. We have an entire squad dedicated to combating this issue. This year, HPD has seized over 16.5 kilograms of heroin, and the price generally ranged from $100 to $120 per gram, and $1,000 to $1,200 per ounce, and $36,000 to $40,000 per kilogram. Now, the next topic I'm going to talk about is pharmaceutical drugs, which really crosses all lines of our community. There's no segment of the community that abuses this, and this is an ever-growing problem. Specifically along the Texas Gulf Coast, and you'll understand that as I get further into this issue. In Houston, pain management clinics continue to be heavily involved in the distribution of those drugs. The state legislature in 2007 passed a bill to expand the state's prescription drugs monitoring program to include drugs such as Vicodin and Xanax. The legislation went into effect on September 1 of 2008. And we've seen an increase in the number of pain management clinics in this area. And these clinics are usually fly-by-night. They're set up in shopping centers, apartment complex, any office building, anywhere that they can hang a sign and have people come in and get their prescription drugs. In Houston, the source of illegal prescription, and not just in Houston, is the city of Houston, the Houston area, is a source of illegal prescription drugs for the entire southeast portion of the United States. This is not just a local problem. This is at large. This is what we're dealing with. Now, let me get into what I think are some of the solutions. Okay. I came in and I heard the discussion about drug courts. I am, and I can say this at Rice, 120% behind drug courts. I really think the concept of the carrot and the stick works. That is, you go to treatment. You stay on your program, or you face the consequences. One of the things that I think that we're lacking, and I don't know how we got off track, but one of the things that bothered me greatly was the study that was conducted on the DARE program and said DARE did not work. I spent the majority of my early years in law enforcement working with young people. And it may not stop the young people from using drugs after they got older. But what was most important about that program was that relationship between the officer and the young people. And I spoke to the man that did the study on that, and I says, you know, if you already had your mind made up, you asked the right questions. But you didn't ask the right questions in your study.
I'm going to eat mine.
So we can't do DARE anymore, but in Houston Police Department, I was convinced, and I always been convinced, that we have to do more of education. So we're using some asset forfeiture money that we've taken from drug dealers, and we're putting officers in 3 other middle schools to talk about anti-gang, anti-drugs, and making good choices about life. And this year, we're going to expand that program to 10 or 12 more middle schools, because it's important that we do this. In addition to that, we're in the early stages of talking to the Boys and Girls Club of having officers go to work on their part-time jobs or extra duty jobs with the Boys and Girls Clubs every day after school. And the majority of that's going to be paid for from money from asset forfeiture funds. So in conclusion, like any other crime problem that we're facing in the city of Houston, illegal drugs is multi-dimensional. There's a lot of causes, a lot of answers, there's a lot of processes, procedures that we need to look at to try to overcome this issue. And none of them are very easy. None of them are very easy. But you have the commitment of the Houston Police Chief and the men and women of the Houston Police Department that we will work with other law enforcement agencies, the community, the faith-based community, as well as with people within the medical community to do all we can to address this issue of drug abuse and the crime associated with that. So I thank you for your time, and I'll stay for questions later on.
Thank you, Chief Hurd. there was one line that I've just overlooked here. Was noted that Chief Hurt is also said to be an avid and able fisherman, except when his line gets tangled up and Larry Jablecki has to back up his boat to unsnare it.
They found this out.
And that gives me the opportunity to move to our next speaker, Lawrence T. Larry Jablecki. Larry Jablecki is an interesting man. I suspect he is one of the few probation officers, indeed for 18 years, director of probation for Brazoria County, to hold a BA, MA, and PhD in philosophy, the latter from the University of Manchester in England. Since 1989, he has been employed as an adjunct faculty member for the University of Houston at Clear Lake, and in that capacity, he has taught philosophy and other courses in the humanities and behavioral sciences to prison inmates. And since 2000, he has been a lecturer at Rice University in the humanities division and in the sociology department, where I had the pleasure and privilege of sharing a course in criminal justice with him. Dr. Jablecki has also published widely in issues of crime, probation, and punishment, and I know we will benefit from his insight.
Thank you, Bill. Get this down here. First, as a preface to my comments, I enthusiastically embrace and applaud the dedication and success of Sue Thurr, our keynote speaker of yesterday's luncheon.
Larry, you need to move a little closer to the microphone in front of you.
Closer? Okay. Want you start over? Okay. Okay. Well, my first comment is I enthusiastically embrace the dedication and success of our keynote speaker at our luncheon yesterday. My impression is she is a one-person army. And I'm just glad that I'm not a soldier in the opposing army. Now, I am persuaded, however, that we should use our limited fiscal resources to assist potential and actual substance abusers in the framework of a new paradigm. One of the few facts of which I am certain in the context of our discussion of the current drug policies in this country is that no new arguments are available to employ in support of or in opposition to them. We are locked in an ideological contest between two conflicting but not mutually exclusive philosophical perspectives, both of which have existed for many centuries. More specifically, the contest of which I speak is between the perspective, the guts of which is that a genuinely free society maximizes the rights and freedoms of its citizens, allowing them to think, say, and act as they please, as long as they do not harm or injure their fellow citizens. The other perspective emphasizes the claim that a stable social order cannot be maintained in the absence of the legal enforcement of a rather long list of the shared moral values of its citizens. In short, this contest is what the 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume called the perpetual struggle between the liberty of the individual and the authority of the state. And what I cannot emphasize too much is that this is not a war between the armies of good and evil. Much too often, too many defenders on both sides of the conflict who are persuaded that truth and justice are on their side have allowed their zeal to sink to the level of inflammatory attacks on the motivation and personal characteristics of their opponents. regardless of our moral stance on a cluster of very divisive issues, all of us should heed the sage comments of the philosopher Isaiah Berlin in his 1958 lecture on two concepts of liberty. Quote, "If, as I believe, the ends of men are many, and not all of them are in principle compatible with each other, then the possibility of conflict and of tragedy can never be wholly eliminated from human life, either personal or social. The necessity of choosing between absolute claims is then an inescapable characteristic of the human condition," unquote. The critical urgency of our present situation is that the contest to win the minds of our fellow citizens is dressed in the new clothes of our moment in history, which means that we can draw inspiration from the past, but not specific answers and solutions. We are therefore participating in a contest to win the opinions and sensibilities of our fellow citizens, and we must be ever mindful that despite the very frequent changes in the mood of the public, that the beliefs and values or opinions of the people in a society that enshrines rights and freedoms in the machinery of government are the ultimate authorization of the policies of that government. I began my career as a practitioner in criminal justice on February 1, 1979, as an adult probation officer in Peoria County. Although my academic credentials included a PhD in the field of philosophy from a British university, my knowledge of criminal justice was confined to readings and the teachings of a university course on the justification of punishment. 1979 was the year, according to some criminal justice scholars, when illegal drug use peaked, and also one of the years when offenders received some severe punishment. Hindsight obliges me to recall my willing participation in a process that sent many young adult offenders, mostly males, to prison from 2 to 10 years for possession of 2 ounces or more of marijuana. A non-sentimental trip down my lane of memories from February 1, 1979 to December 1st, 1985 unleashes some genuine shame and guilt regarding the ease with which I made recommendations to prosecutors and judges to impose jail and prison terms on a large group of almost exclusively nonviolent users of illegal substances and some insignificant pack mules in the delivery of drugs. In short, I was one of the players in a very serious game in which the winners destroyed and permanently injured the losers. During the same block of time in my career, I can truthfully credit myself with some real and persistent efforts to assist a large number of substance abusers using the large amount of authority delegated to me by the district and county courts. I was supervising felony and misdemeanor probationers, most of whom were males, ages 17 through their early 30s, and the majority of the offenses for which they were granted probation involved alcohol, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana. The scarcity of quality substance abuse programs with a track record of success and skilled counselors with qualifications with more than the status of being a former addict were major impediments. But much effective assistance was provided by the VA hospital in Houston, Synacor Foundation in Houston, local groups under the auspice of the Houston-based Palmer Drug Abuse Program, and a few trained substance abuse counselors. During this time, I was also confronted by outbursts of anger from some probationers and attended the funerals of several who committed suicide or were killed by gunfire or knives during a drug transaction. Being called a worthless and rotten son of a bitch by a young man high on methamphetamine is not a pleasant experience. Nor is attending the funerals of young men who were in the prime of their lives. On December 1, 1985, I began my tenure as the director of the Adult Probation Department in Peoria County. By this time, I was coming to the realization that something was fundamentally wrong or even hypocritical with a process, the ostensible purpose of which is to redirect many lives in a positive direction, was actually sending numerous nonviolent offenders to jail and prison, effectively destroying their lives, creating havoc in their families, leaving them with a permanent scar of a criminal conviction and all of the collateral consequences of being an ex-convict. Every judge in the state of Texas trying felony and misdemeanor criminal cases was obliged by some draconian policies in our penal code regarding illegal substances that mocked the ideal of assisting a very large group of offenders to achieve the status of autonomous moral persons who freely accept their responsibilities as citizens of our communities. I retired on February 1, 2004, and when I look back on my accomplishments of 18 years, I can only hope that the many programs I created with the support of 7 elected judges, and I probably should say most of the time, and the hard work of some dedicated staff have yielded a harvest of positive results in the lives of numerous offenders that outweighs the amount of harm that I was instrumental in inflicting in many lives early in my career. The luxury of time to read and reflect on close to 30 years of direct interaction with several thousands of probationers and prison inmates enables me to feel confident in the following observations and assertions. I am enormously proud to be an American citizen and would not choose to live elsewhere. I am, however, unequivocally ashamed of the indisputable fact that during the last 30 years, our criminal justice policies, both federal and state, have led to our international notoriety as the nation that incarcerates a higher percentage of its population than any other country in the world. The dominant crime control policies are driven by a harsh retributive view of punishment, committed to the belief that the only criteria for doing justice are the seriousness of the offense and the criminal history of the defendant. Making no claim to originality, we have been beguiled by a drug addiction more powerful than all the drugs combined, namely vengeance.
That's right.
This is a bitter pill.
That's right.
And I am persuaded that honesty obliges us to swallow it. Quite often during my career, I was a target of some pejorative remarks, particularly by prosecutors, that I belong to the species of liberal weenies who are soft on crime. Yeah. For many years, however, I have consistently maintained some beliefs, most of which my students in prison find acceptable. I do not believe in or hope for the eventual abolition of all prisons. I do not believe that there is a treasure in the heart of all criminal offenders waiting to be discovered. A relatively small number, as a result of their choices, are incorrigibly mean and evil. I believe that far too many decades-long and life sentences are imposed in our courts. But I believe in the hard coinage of punishment for most offenders who murder, commit acts of both potential and actual violence, and that some offenders should be incarcerated for life without the possibility of parole. Now, the declaration of the war against drugs has responded to and produced some moral panics in our society, leading to the still widely held belief that the users of drugs deemed illegal are enemies to be conquered and destroyed. When you fight a war, the mission is to kill and maim your enemies. And that is exactly what we have accomplished. There is a wealth of scholarly bickering about the feasibility of determining the actual number of nonviolent drug offenders in federal and state and private prisons. I am confident that no informed person can produce evidence to inflict any serious damage on the remarks of Michael Tunry in his book, Thinking About Crime, Sense and Sensibility in American Penal Culture. Quote, "Many thousands of people are serving decades-long sentences in federal prisons for nonviolent drug crimes. Their misfortune is to have been sentenced in federal courts before the avoidance of sentencing guidelines by federal judges and prosecutors became common practice. Hundreds of thousands of people, mostly but not only of minority and disadvantaged backgrounds, have spent much of their young adulthood in prison for drug crimes. Their misfortune is that unwisely, but for young people, not uncommonly and typically as a result of peer influence and teenager sense of invincibility, they experimented with drug use, got hooked, got caught in a time when anti-drug policies were unprecedentedly harsh," unquote. It would be a major error in judgment to claim that the tough law and order campaigns of those seeking to retain or attain public office and well-financed lobbyists urging the construction of more prisons were solely responsible for the realities presented by Tunry. Members of Congress and state legislators would not have been able to craft and pass harsh punitive policies without the strong support of their constituents, i.e., the opinions of the people. Their beliefs and values approve the decision in favor of going to war. Fortunately, the opinions and sensibilities of a fast-growing number of our citizens are moving in the direction of believing that the war of prohibition, eradication, and harsh penalties is costing far too much in terms of human fatalities and consuming far too much of our federal and state fiscal resources. Many and very vocal groups of dissenters using the technology of mass communication are focusing on some items for an agenda for change, specifically the medical use of marijuana, the decriminalization of the possession of small amounts of marijuana, the still unresolved issue of the wide disparity in the disposition of cases involving crack and powder cocaine, access to clean syringes to reduce the spread of HIV and hepatitis C, and new medical research involving prescription heroin or heroin replacements to drug addicts with the goals of improving health and reducing crime. In this national and highly divisive crisis, it is critically important for all of us, especially elected policymakers and Congress and state legislators, to be reminded that we share a common history in which heretics were burned, the institution of slavery was ordained by the Creator, homosexuals were prosecuted and jailed for lewd and unnatural conduct, and males dominate females because nature has endowed them with emotional and intellectual superiority. Now, all of these chapters in our history are now condemned. I don't ever try to pull that, by the way. She's right there. As violations of basic human rights, but in their moments of time were considered as timeless and immutable truths. Now, no one person is qualified to provide a detailed blueprint with an exit strategy from this ideological conflict and all of the items that should be on an agenda for change. I will therefore conclude with issuing an admittedly radical and heretical but feasible challenge to the administrators of our nation's criminal justice machine and make a recommendation to the next President of the United States. The Uniform Crime Report of 2007, compiled by the FBI, contains the following data. Of the 14,209,385 reported arrests, 1.8 million, or 13%, were for drug abuse violations. 872,721 of those arrests for drug abuse violations, or 47.5%, were for marijuana. And of that number, 775,138, or 89%, were for possession. The remaining involved the sale and growing of marijuana. 3 of every 4 persons in the group of 872,721 were under the age of 30. It is a given that many thousands in this group had a significant criminal history, and it is equally true that many thousands did not. This means that thousands of young citizens with no criminal history are caught in the very wide net of criminal justice, and the majority of them must endure a grueling process of adjudication which brands them with a conviction and the status of being a criminal. The radical proposal, which I believe is realistically feasible, would retrain the same professionals who administer our criminal justice system to create pre-prosecution agreements, which still send a message of societal disapproval but leave no permanent scars. The specific guts of the proposal are: all persons arrested for possessing small amounts of any illegal substance, excluding the sale and or delivery or growing, having no criminal history, shall be granted a one-time only pre-prosecution agreement not to exceed 1 year. Within 30 days of accepting this agreement, they shall complete a substance abuse evaluation by a certified substance abuse counselor approved by the local jurisdiction and follow any recommendation of said counselor. Within 30 days of successful completion of this agreement, the local jurisdiction and the state's crime records division shall destroy and expunge all records of the case, accepting a list of all of the participants. Any participant who is arrested and convicted of any new criminal offense is subject to prosecution of the original case. The prosecutors in every local jurisdiction of this country have the explicit or inherent authority to create these programs, and they certainly have the discretionary authority to dispose of numerous felony arrests by using this option.
We need a quick hurry up.
Okay, all right. Regarding the recommendation to the next president, since November of 2000, in 3 published articles, I have called for the creation of state and national commissions to rewrite our drug laws in the framework of public health and safety. I was greatly encouraged by the recent publication of Lee Brown's article in the Chronicle calling for a crime panel. My recommendation, in a sense, dovetails in with his, but this is mine, that no person holding an elected public office is eligible for appointment The members shall include nationally recognized experts in the field of healthcare, medicine, pharmacology, drug addiction, criminology, sociology, constitutional law, and law enforcement. The presidential marching orders include the requirement that all federal drug laws and policies be written in the framework of public health and safety. The collective motto of the people who build private prisons, they're not going to be involved in this, is if we build them, they will be sent. So in closing, during his tenure as Secretary to the House of Commons, Winston Churchill was moved to remark that the moral fabric of any civilized society can be judged by how it treats its citizens who violate the criminal laws. At this moment in our history, I am persuaded that the moral ground on which we stand is not very high, and the judgments of future historians who evaluate us will be very harsh. Thank you.
I think you can understand what I meant when I said it was a privilege and a pleasure to share a course with Larry Jablecki. In the early stages of planning this conference, several people suggested that it would be wonderful if we could get Dallas Judge John Creuzot to speak to us about his work with drug courts and any other aspect of dealing with drug offenders that he deemed appropriate. And when I mentioned that at an early meeting that I planned to invite him, the reaction was enthusiastic. And after he accepted our invitation, despite the fact that he is in the closing days of an re-election campaign, still other people said, Judge Creuzot's coming? That's great. On Monday, I mentioned to a person who was here, she's from Dallas, she said, who's going to be on your program? And I said, well, we got your Dallas Judge John Creuzot. She said, I got a sign for him in my yard.
All right.
And and after Dr. Costin's presentation this morning, Larry Jablecki and I were talking with him outside the hallway, and he was asking, have you been able to work with this with any judges? And he says, not yet, but there's a judge in Dallas who is very open to such things. I think he's on your program, and indeed he is. I don't want to detract from Judge Creuzot's time, and by the way, he has to leave pretty soon after to catch a plane back to Dallas. I've told him to say what he wants to say. If we have to dispense with the question and answer period, I don't want to cut into his time. So that may be what we need to do. I think that's all right. I will note that he was named as a pioneer judge by the National Association of Drug Court Professionals in June 2000 for his contributions to the drug treatment court field, and he is in the Drug Court Hall of Fame. In September 2005, Judge Creuzot was named Outstanding Jurist of the Year by the State Bar of Texas Criminal Bar Section. He's a member of the American Bar Association's Commission on Effective Criminal Sanctions, and he serves as an advisor to the American Law Institute Model Penal Code Sentencing Project. Your Honor, it's our honor to have you here today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. It has taken me 51 years to get over to walk around on Rice University grounds. My grades and SAT scores didn't get me here, but it's nice to be here anyway. It's also nice to be back home. I went to Lamar High School, Pershing Junior High, and my mom and dad live here. My family, my brother and sister and all of their kids live here. And last night, being here for this gave me an opportunity to speak to my 17-year-old nephew about the value of a 76 grade point average. So we talked about commitment and how to get from here to there and do it with some dignity. And so that's what I want to talk about today, how the criminal justice system is, and I'm going to play off the words of our previous speaker, moving from revenge to redemption and what we do. This whole issue earlier brought up of whether it's broken. Yes, it's broken. The criminal justice system is broken. and it's broken in more ways than one, and I've been a willing participation in my past in that brokenness. 1982, I became an assistant district attorney in Dallas County working for Henry Wade. And back in those days, if you had a dirty urine test for marijuana and you were on felony probation, there was only one response, and that was 2 years in the penitentiary. And that was deemed acceptable. And all of us, not all of us, but probably most of us in Dallas and around the state, and probably around the United States, that was our practice, because we didn't understand treatment, we didn't understand addiction, we weren't taught about it. But back in 1989, somebody started to take note, and that was in Miami, Florida, and that was Janet Reno, who became the Attorney General of the United States for 8 years under the Bill Clinton administration. She and a judge there decided that sending drug addicts back to jail and watching them come back and send them and watch them come back was just kind of stupid. And of course, in the field of recovery and probably other social sciences, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is called insanity. And so they decided they weren't going to practice insanity anymore, and they were going to take a different approach. And so the drug court movement began. And drug courts began as diversion programs. They have evolved into other aspects along the trail of a case. But nonetheless, in the early 1990s, an entity became formed, and it was the National Association of Drug Court Professionals that not only brought judges, but probation officers, district attorneys, police officers, defense attorneys, treatment specialists, supervision, case managers. All of those people came together to talk about a comprehensive and coordinated approach to offenders with drug and alcohol issues. It has now evolved that we not only focus on drug and alcohol, but we focus on mental health. We talk about other disabilities, and we put that approach into our juvenile justice system, and we're also doing it as a reentry program, which I'll talk about a little more later. But nonetheless, we've come a long way. That entity now has several thousand members. It has an annual conference that 3,500 people will attend, 3,500 people will attend. And today, there are over 2,000 drug courts or problem-solving courts across the United States. Problem-solving courts initially were funded by the federal government under the Clinton administration. Some of that money has dried up. There's more money now coming along for training as opposed to funding the court, but looking to state governments and local governments, that challenge is being met in many instances. But let's move along a little bit and talk about the state of Texas. I became a judge in 1991, but prior to that, being either an assistant district attorney or in private practice, and of course, most of you here lived in Texas at that time, you may remember that we had a crisis in the state of Texas, and that is a lot of violent individuals were being released from our prisons onto our streets to perpetrate more crimes. Well, the reason is twofold that we were releasing them. Number one, we didn't have any place to keep them, okay? But the reason we didn't have any place to keep them was because we were sending these little low-level offenders with drug cases and alcohol issues into the state penitentiary. Remember what I said? The first dirty UA got you one response, right? Prison. Well, that's nice. It sounds good. It moves the case. And emotionally, you know, I did something. Okay? But the reality of it is you've perpetrated more harm on the community than you have good on the community when we have to put that person in a place where they don't belong and don't need to be to learn about more crime. And we'll let the violent offender, the murderer, the rapist, and the kidnappers, and all those folks out the other end. See, we thought we were being smart on crime, but we were harming the community each and every time we did that. So back in 1990, you remember that an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, became the governor of the state of Texas. A person who understood recovery and understood addiction. And one of her philosophies and platforms was, we're going to stop doing this. We need to stop doing this. This is not right, what we're doing. And so we started thinking about treatment and rehabilitation in the criminal justice system. And then she and the legislature developed what was then called, and it's now long over, but the Texas Punishment Standards Commission, and I was one of her appointees to that. And after a lot of meetings, consideration, and legislative back and forth and all that stuff, you know, Mark Twain's right, two things you don't want to be seen. You don't want to see being made is sausage and legislation. He's right. Okay, I felt like I was going through the grinder down there in Austin, as a matter of fact. But we came up with a bill, and the bill reformed some aspects of criminal justice in the state of Texas. Number one, we developed a lower level felony that now includes less than 1 gram of many drugs, common street drugs, things you've heard about today, cocaine, meth, some of the other drugs out there. Okay, and what we do with that is, first of all, back then you had to get probation, and it is the state of affairs now if it's your first case. But we focused on a state jail facility, which was a rehabilitative facility as opposed to a penal facility. And so we had an opportunity to put people in rehabilitation and to focus on that and get them out, and hopefully they'll do better. We had the opportunity to bring them out early if we sentenced them to that. So we went along with that, and it seemed to open our eyes just slightly to what we had been doing wrong and what we needed to do. But the real research and effort was not there. So we kept kind of going along. We had another administration in 1994, and the money that had been put in the previous administration in prisons and our jails and what have you for rehabilitation and treatment, that dried up because that was no longer a priority. In fact, I remember going to Austin in those days on the advice of Senator Royce West from Dallas to speak to that governor's criminal justice director, whose qualifications, I think, for the job were a couple of things. He was young. He was energetic. I'm sure those were good qualities. He had been a Harris County prosecutor, trial prosecutor, and I think perhaps the most important one, at least talking to him about why he was there, was that he played baseball for the University of Texas. And so we had a little discussion about drug courts, and he told me drug courts and treatment are not on the agenda for that administration. So that kind of ended that conversation. But somebody got elected president, and somebody else became governor. And that somebody else is our current governor, who's Rick Perry. And when Rick Perry, in the waning days of Bush being here before he went to Washington to become president, I met with him personally. And at the end of the meeting, he shook my hand, and he says, as either lieutenant governor or governor, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we have drug courts in the state of Texas. And he has remained true to that promise. He's never wavered, and he soldiered on with us to the point that in 2001, we developed legislation in the state recognizing drug courts and the funding. We went in 1998 when we developed our diversion court in Dallas County from having 5 drug courts to over 80 today in the state of Texas. He signed additional legislation. At the time, the original legislation said if you were a county of over 500,000 people, you must have a drug court. Well, now it's been lowered down to 200,000 people. He signed all that legislation and other funding methods to help create and sustain drug courts in the state of Texas. So he's truly been a friend of drug courts in our communities that suffer from drug addiction and alcoholism. And so where are we today? What is this thing called the drug court, and what do we do? Initially, as I said, drug courts began as a diversion model. Some form of, we're not going to charge you, or if we do, we're not going to indict you, or if we do, we're going to dismiss the case and make it go away at the end of your term of whatever it is for your treatment and what have you. Well, drug courts now have evolved. Not every community wanted to do it that way. Some communities wanted to do it as a probation model. And so we have the post-adjudication model and also the diversion model. We've also developed the idea that individuals coming out of the criminal justice system, out of penitentiaries or maybe prison-based treatment, are going to come back into the community. And they perhaps went there with very serious drug problems that have not been addressed when they come back. They may have, but they may not. But certainly not the type of coordination and cooperation and collaboration that we do in drug courts, where the judge is there, the treatment provider, the case manager, the probation officer, the DA, the law enforcement, and the attorney representing the defendants in the case. Nothing like that ever happens anywhere. So we're also bringing those individuals, especially in this state, who come from a prison-based treatment facility, we're bringing them back to court and saying, let's start over. We're going to put you on home plate here, okay? We're going to let you run around and score a run, but we're going to be watching you the whole way. And when you deviate from the base path, we're going to nudge you back on it And if you try to run up in the stands, we're going to grab you and pull you back on it. And if you try to run out of the park, we're going to catch you out there and get you back in here too. We're not going to let you fail is the bottom line. Okay? And so we've expanded into that. We've expanded into prostitution courts. We've expanded into mental health courts. But all with the same idea, that we're going to do it collaboratively, that we're going to sit down with the police chief and say, what can you do? What can you give us? What can you help us with? And in Dallas, we have a mobile unit now that goes out to the truck stops before the prostitutes commit the crime and offer them an opportunity to come in, to get tested, to come in and get a place to stay, to come in and to get treatment, to get sober, to get some clothes, an opportunity to get back their lives so they can get back what? Their children, so they can get back with a place to stay and get an education. And the most important thing is they might not get back their dignity, but they might discover that they have dignity for the first time in their lives. Okay. We're offering that. And in these drug courts, we offer other people the opportunity to either discover dignity or to rediscover their dignity. I remember the day a few years ago, and I just have this image. It's about all I can remember because I deal with a lot of people with aberrant behavior, as you can imagine. And there was a woman in my courtroom. She screamed at me, and I'm not going to repeat the names that she called me. But she called me a few. And she told me, I'm not going to treatment. I said, oh, yes, you are. Oh, no, I'm not. I don't need to go to treatment. I said, oh, you're going. You just don't know it. So I had the bailiff arrest her. A few months ago, I was in a dentist chair having some dental surgery. Yeah. So you laugh, but you know, do you know what I'm getting ready to say? What? What am I going to say? She was over my mouth. Instruments in hand. Being my dentist. That's right. She's my dentist. I didn't know at the time she was a dentist. Okay. I've looked up and seen tenured university professors, humble, crack addicts, physicians, dentists, stockbrokers. Of course, there are other things affecting their self-esteem today. But all those people, classes of individuals, the poor, the rich, the mentally ill, from this side of town or that side of town, from Highland Park, like the River Oaks, okay, from Third Ward, like South Dallas, from this part, like that part, they come, and they come broken. And it's our job not to seek revenge, but to show them redemption. It's our job not to nail them and jail them, but to get them out of jail and try to make them whole. And we do that. We do that by motivating them to change. And what we have developed is a whole technique of how to approach these individuals and how to do this and do it right so that we're achieving success. Success meaning you're back in the community, you're whole, you're with your children, as opposed in the days when I started, success meaning I just clicked off another conviction, see you later. See, we've changed. It's broken, and a whole lot of things about it are broken. But we have changed, and we are changing. And you have leaders who are helping us change. You have two leaders right here in this room. Now, one I liken to a small atomic explosion. Okay? She is what my grandmother would call herself. And my grandmother was not quite 5 feet. But my grandmother said, I'm a little piece of leather well put together. That's how she described herself. And you have a little piece of leather well put together in this room, and that's Caprice Cosper sitting right there. That's right. Give her a big hand. And Brock Thomas is seated right next to her. And there are other judges here in Dallas County, okay, who on their own took it up as judges with the help and the assistance of some of the individuals seated right here in front of me today, Houston Ministers Against Crime. Because when there didn't seem to be any support for doing what these judges are doing or what they wanted to or felt in their heart was right, they provided the support. And they provided a little agitation. And they went down to talk to the DA. What's his name? I forgot. What's his name? I forgot his name. Oh, we don't even want to know that again. Okay, I ain't gonna mention that. Okay. All right. But Houston changed, and Dallas changed, and San Antonio has changed, and Austin has changed, and your legislators have changed, and you have a receptive governor. And so the future's bright, I think, for this approach. We see money being given to us and our ability to provide treatment. But I want to talk about something else that your previous speaker talked about that's kind of missed. You remember what he said about those pre-prosecution agreements? What was the first thing he said under that, other than within 30 days? He mentioned something that sometimes we don't catch. He said an appropriate evaluation, a valid assessment or evaluation. By whom did he say? Who did he say was going to do that? A licensed professional who knows what he or she is doing. Why? So we get the right answer and we put everybody in their right place. Okay? Don't miss that in what he said. Because the practice of drug courts is now bleeding into the practice of probation departments. And the practice of drug courts is now bleeding into the practices of the judiciary and the district attorneys and the defense attorneys. We now understand about an evidence-based assessment because of leaders like Judge Cosper and Judge Thomas. They've done something here in Houston that we're now mimicking in Dallas. They've gotten almost all, if not all, the judges to agree that plea bargains will not determine placement and treatment. Okay? That it's going to be determined not by how you like or dislike or feel or don't feel, but it's going to be determined by that valid assessment. It's going to drive the placement. Okay? And so the bottom line is we have all types of evidence-based approaches. That is research that shows if you do this as opposed to that, you're going to get a much better outcome. And let me talk about those before I finish. Dallas County Divert Court evaluation done by SMU, 68% reduction in recidivism. Okay? We went over to the economics department, got a professor and some doctoral students to do a cost-benefit analysis. For every dollar spent, we save $9.34. Okay? But the real telling thing, okay, the real thing that really matters is a young lady who comes up to get a certificate of achievement from me years ago, and she was shaking so much she couldn't reach up to get it. And I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "I've never done this before." I said, "Never done what?" "Never accomplished anything." Nobody's ever told me I did a good job because I never did. Okay? She graduated. And she's clean and sober like the thousands others across this state. And so I appreciate you having me. Have a great day.
Dr. Lawyer Chief. That's that is a good combination. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. We have some time here for questions. Have the questions been collected, or did I got some coming here? I didn't know whether I cut that off by. All right. Oh. Dr. Jablecki, how can you talk about the legalization of drugs, in a country that I used to be younger? I remember it, but I can't do much about it. I tell my wife I said, I saw this old guy, and she says, older than you? Let's see. In a country that separates church and state, this is a disproportionate view of the moral fiber of our society. Do you understand that?
I think I might get the drift of it. again, I can only express that in terms of these two conflicting philosophical perspectives. And again, I think that in a truly free society, we always have to lean heavily on the side of freedom of individuals. And certainly when it comes to possession of marijuana, I certainly agree with everything Judge Gray, his position is that we should decriminalize the use and possession of small amounts of it, and it might even mean you go to Walgreens and get a pack of, I don't know. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do know this, is that what we're doing now, scarring people for life with convictions, is not a good thing, and certainly our society is not going to dissolve if we change, if our values and beliefs change. It just strengthens our society. Society is not going to fall apart.
I'm not at all sure that question should be interpreted in this way, but I do want to make a point about tying up legalization of drugs. How can you talk about that in a country that separates church and state? Some of the countries that are absolutely the harshest on drugs have no separation of church and state. And I don't think many of us want to live in those countries. Chief Hurt, what percentage of law enforcement is dedicated to arresting dealers versus arresting users, especially address trace drug cases?
Well, as far as percentage, about 59% of our officers are assigned to uniform patrol. About 20%, actually it's 17.5% are assigned to investigations. That's undercover investigations. And out of that 17%, probably about 1 or 2% are assigned to narcotics enforcement or drug enforcement. So it's a very small unit that we have. But everybody in Houston Police Department can enforce drug laws, uniform as well as the investigators. So if you're looking at percentages of specialty areas, probably about 1% of the department, maybe even less. But as far as the entire department, we're all concentrated on drug enforcement, whether they're dealers or users. But one of the things that happens after a certain level of activity or involvement of dealers, they usually come under a task force. We have a high-intensity drug trafficking area task force here that is with local agencies as well as the FBI, not the FBI, DEA. And we also have our street-level drug officers or enforcement level. So that percentage could be anywhere from 100% of the officers that we have out on the street, plain clothes and uniform, to 1%, or depending on the level of involvement. We concentrate more on and patrol, and with most of our people, street-level dealers. When we get into major dealers, which is cross state lines or international lines, we then put together our forces with the federal agencies and other county and state enforcement. As far as the trace, I think that issue is where people are saying that we arrest people for trace cocaine and pipes and what they have in their possession or use or minor use. We probably have about 60 officers, what we call our crime reduction unit, that we put in high crime areas, and we do arrest a lot of people for trace in small amounts because of this. They are the individuals, and I mentioned this in my comments. How do we think that those individuals are paying for their drug habits? They are the ones that are, I get the calls of, why are there so many burglars in my neighborhood? My car has been broken into, my computer is gone, my wallet's gone, even I left a key in it and they took the car too. But we have to do these order maintenance issues and able to prevent more serious crime from occurring, because in my definition of a burglar, as an individual, as a burglar who break into a house or car or whatever, or They're hijacking individuals on the street, robbing individuals on the street. They are one step from a homicide suspect, depending upon the amount of resistance they meet. So I do agree that we have to have alternative programs for people with small amounts and first offenders. But habitual criminals, we need to deal with them, and we need to deal with them harshly.
Last question here for Judge Creuzot. So treatment is a major cost for drug courts. Where can we get more money for treatment?
Yeah, there you go. That's a good question. Well, counties can fund treatment. I think and it's the county's role to keep the community safe. Police chiefs and police departments, local police departments have money, seizure money, forfeiture money. They get money in their budgets. I think that City Hall, every City Hall, major City Hall in the county ought to think about it, the mayors and the City Council people. There's money from the state of Texas, and everyone needs to encourage their state reps and their state senators to continue to fund those monies and add to them. The good news is that because of these practices, these drug court practices being implemented throughout the criminal justice systems in the counties, we haven't had any initiatives to add to the 150,000 prison beds in this state. But for that, we would have had to build. I mean, the numbers are clear, they're there. So certainly, reminding your legislators that we are saving money by treatment and doing these things, we can get money put our direction. And also, as Congresswoman Lee said, they're doing everything they can in Washington to restore lost monies back into drug courts, be it training and implementation or whatever. So I think any of those places, if you let your representatives know that drug courts are important, that you know that, you understand that, they play an important role in your specific community, I think that any reasonable policymaker will listen to you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Judge. One of the other things you all should know is that SAMHSA, this past session, and we'll be doing it again, has had funding for the treatment part of drug courts. We recognize that is the largest cost in drug courts. But I'm really sad to say that I don't remember Houston or Dallas applying for those dollars. So let's make sure that this upcoming time, that Texas remembers to take care of Texas.
We heard you. I got you.
Soon you can be moving back over to the Baker Institute for the rest of the program this afternoon. I suspect, what is it, start at 2 the next part, or is it 11? Right now, okay. All right, start right now. So you move quickly, but this has been a fine day, and this has been a fine program. Thank you again, our great speakers.
Yeah, I'll give you a call.